Flashy girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Oh, Mr. Sheffield. I am Shawn Pasquale here with my co-host, Toria Sheffield.
Oh, shoot. And this time Toria Sheffield.
All right, wait, let's start over and I'll
No, it's fine. Let them be here in the moment with us.
That's it. Welcome back to another episode of this highly professional show that we do every week. This week we are back in season 2. Now we are on season 2, episode 5.
Episode 6.
Episode 6. I'm going to do this all season. I should write these down. Season 2, episode 6 of The Nanny. This one is called The Nanny Napper. It was written by Jane Hamill and Rick Shaw. Rick Shaw. That's pretty funny. And it was directed by Lee Schlazel, Hoff and Pepper Incorporated.
Mazel tov.
This was, in my description, a wildly convoluted episode that made me dizzy just reading the synopsis.
Well, and this is the episode where Fran accidentally kidnaps a baby on the subway. My first note was, this is a very New York-centric episode. And
Yes.
I think if you've lived in New York, a lot of these jokes are going to land harder than if you never have.
Boy. Yeah, guess what? I've never lived in New York, and all the jokes landed, and like, you guys aren't special. Oh,
No.
If you live in New York, you're gonna get that she was me on a subway. Oh, whatever.
No, not even
People.
that. Just like the different. I disagree. I was like, oh, this kind of makes me miss New York in its own way. Like jokes about the 311 emergency line and all that kind of stuff. But we started with what I wrote is some very 90s subway B-roll that really reminded me of like a Seinfeld episode. This is, I'll say, it sort of had that like grainy 90s quality. And I think that this is one of the first episodes where we really have a lot of the episode take place outside of the home. I mean, I guess that's not true. We have had some country club sets. We've had it before, but I was sort of like, oh, I can see them expanding their sets more and more now.
They built a subway set and a
people
police station set, and then they were like, we need to use these.
Well, and the episode starts, Fran is taking the kids on the subway, which they have like never been on before because they have been driven around Manhattan their whole lives. And they're just like, this is so weird. This is so cool. This is so gross. And actually this crazy man marches up to Fran and yells, "Give me $1." And then she's like, "Don't worry, kids. I'll take care of this." And she's just like, "Who am I? Santa Claus? You give me $1." And then he like freaks out and gives her the money. And I loved that moment. But apparently Shawn was unimpressed. He was unimpressed.
No, there were a lot of funny moments in this episode. I just felt like as a whole, it felt like there were a lot of, especially at the end, there were like 3 like tacked on contrivances in a row that I was just like, all right.
Well, what ends up happening is, she's, they end up seeing this very, very overwhelmed Russian woman who has like literally 8 kids with her, and she's holding a baby. And this was a little weird where she was like, literally, it was almost like they were from the old country from 100 years ago. Like she's like feeding them bread and cheese on the subway and like doling it out. Like they're at an orphanage, which I've never seen that on the subway, though I have seen a lot of crazy things. But so Fran offers to help this woman, and she ends up holding the woman's infant. And then while she and the Sheffield children are kind of cooing over this little baby, they get to the next stop, and the Russian woman and all the other kids kind of get like ushered out in the flow of commuters. And Fran doesn't even notice. So then the doors close and the subway starts leaving the station as this Russian woman is like frantically banging on the doors, like, presumably in Russian, screaming like, my baby, my baby. And I have this note that says that might seem unrealistic, but if you have ridden the subway in New York long enough, you have probably seen this happen. Somebody getting separated from their child.
Yeah. I thought that whole scene was like shot well and kind of handled. Like it made sense. It was very clear. Like she wasn't purposely trying to keep this baby. She was just like cooing the kid. And then all of like the Sheffield children sort of gathered around Fran, kind of blocking her view of the door. And then like as the mad rush of people to like get on and off the train, you sort of see this woman's head like kind of bobbing up in the crowd, being like, no, no, no,
Yes. And we also established that this is the same Sunday as Gay Pride. So, Manhattan is just sort of like just a buzz and busy and impossible to navigate because it's such a huge event. And so
another contrivance, like, it was like, oh, it's Gay Pride. Oh, and also she accidentally kidnaps a baby. Like, oh, and also like.
But I love how all of these contrivances don't bother you, but that bottle episode that I don't like because of all its contrivances with like the butler and the mistaken identity, or like the Butler's Association, mistaken identity, lies on top of lies. Like you were very there for that. You're not there for this.
I know.
Well, but so Fran and the children get home and they have the baby and they think that this woman intentionally abandoned the baby because they didn't see all of this stuff that we as the viewer saw. So they just think like, oh my God, how horrible, someone abandoning this little baby. So they get home and, she's like, Maggie, go get their blanket, Gracie, go get blah, blah, blah. And Mr. Sheffield walks in and he's literally like, Niles, Miss Fine, baby. And then he's like, what? Like it was one of those that admittedly is a sitcom moment where it's like,
very much
he realizes a beat too late. And he's very annoyed that she brought this baby home. And he's like, you need to just call child services. Like we, take care of this. We don't want this child, this little infant baby around the house. And Cece is of course like, we have so much work to do. We can't be dealing with this. Like, get this taken care of. And I really enjoyed, I don't know if you clocked this. I'm from DC, so I didn't know this was like national news. But at one point when Fran tells Maggie to go try to find a bottle, Maggie comes back and goes, I couldn't find a bottle, but I thought a turkey baster might work. And then Fran goes, yeah, maybe if we were trying to impregnate Ling Ling, who famously is a panda at the National Zoo in the 90s. Like when I was a child, Sing Sing and Ling Ling were like the crown jewels of the DC
Zoo. Toria, this was national news.
Well, but
this was not local news.
But I didn't know that.
Deal. Oh yeah, no. I mean, we knew about them in Florida. Like it was a big deal because they were like pandas and they were trying to get them to mate, and like this was a big deal. I think it was also like there were jokes on The Simpsons. There have been. This was like a cultural, the Menendez brothers and O.J. Simpson and like the Rodney King riots, like those were like the 90s, like cultural touchstones.
that was the 90s, O.J. and Ling Ling. But yeah, no, I mean, it made me very happy to hear that reference, but it also for the first time in my entire life was like, oh, that was news to people outside of, little kids in Washington, D.C. Also, we can hear you tip-tapping away, Shawn. I don't know.
I'm just Googling stuff for later, but sorry, go on. I can mute that all.
He's answering emails.
If you hadn't pointed it out, I could have just very easily like muted my side of things in post, but now that we've put it up.
Just wanted to call everyone's attention to it. But, well, okay, I really liked this whole thing because this sets up a couple scenes with Fran and Mr. Sheffield where we really get to see what they would be like co-parenting a baby, which I thought was very sweet and very endearing because at first Mr. Sheffield seems so irate that she's brought this baby home but then it's like he almost can't help himself. Like he ends up holding the baby and cooing with the baby and he even brings down some of Brighton's old baby clothes to change the baby into, and the whole thing is like they're going to bring the baby to child services, but Manhattan is just so busy right now. They're waiting for things to die down so they can like get across town more easily. And meanwhile, they're just hanging with this baby. And there's even this scene where they're changing the baby's diaper together. And I thought this was like a very heartwarming scene where we see how they work really well together. And at one point she even calls him honey. She calls Mr. Sheffield honey. She's like, oh, honey, I mean, Mr. Sheffield.
It didn't feel like this was the impetus for the whole episode. Like to me, once I saw these scenes playing out, I was like, oh, this whole episode exists so they could do this sort of like parenting, play acting stuff with Mr. Sheffield and Fran and sort of move that plot line along in that way. And like, look, they'd even be good at this.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think like the whole emotional crux of this episode is to introduce this idea of like, what would it be like if they had a baby, and also to reinforce how suited to each other they are, even though neither of them are willing to admit it or can see it. And so I love that part of this show. It's a very like rom-commy, they should be together but don't realize it thing that is sort of the engine that drives this for seasons. And I loved it. And then I also thought all the other stuff was really fun and funny. So again, I wasn't like upset by the frenetic nature of this. But so they then turn the TV on to calm the baby after they've changed his diaper, at which point the local news is on, and it's basically like, this woman has been accused of kidnapping an infant earlier today on the New York subway. Like, please call if you have any information about her. And it's clearly a drawing of Fran. And then Mr. Sheffield's basically like, I don't want anything to do with this anymore. And then it instantly goes, she's believed to work for Broadway producer Maxwell Sheffield. And then it shows a picture of him. So he's now like instantly implicated in all of this. And, you know, it's like, if you know anything about their whereabouts, like, please contact the police right now. So he's basically like, okay, forget it. We're going to the police station right now. Like, this has to get resolved. Which leads them to sort of like the second half of leads us to the second half of the episode, which leads them to this New York City police precinct. And
the second set that they had.
The second set. Well, I actually have this note that said, so they head to the police station, and when they walk in, Fran goes, this looks just like the police station on Cagney and Lacey. And then so Cagney and Lacey was also a CBS show, and they were preparing like a month or two later, like the network was preparing for a Cagney and Lacey movie. So I almost wonder if it was the same set and that was an inside joke.
I had that thought too.
But so, you know, they see Fran, and Fran instantly gets arrested for kidnapping. And there's this really funny beat where they go to like get her. Is it like a mugshot where, you know, you're standing up against the wall and it has your height, and they go heels, and she like very begrudgingly takes off her heels, which like lowers her height by a few solid inches. And then they go hair, and a hand reaches out and pushes her very high teased hair down so it's flat on her head.
Yes.
I think she loses several more inches. It was just a great little beat.
There were a lot of those like there were a lot of those kinds of very silly beats throughout the whole police station sequence, and it was all like cute and enjoyable, but it reminded me of like the same question that I know like Brooklyn Nine-Nine writing staff has been struggling with this last year, which is like post like George Floyd protests, like it's really tough to like laugh at cops in like a there's no consequences kind of way, you know?
Yeah, well, but I would say there was a couple moments where the police are even in the mix. And one I would say involves a strip search, which I do understand why you're like, not funny to joke about a police officer potentially taking advantage of you during a strip search.
Yes.
But I thought they were actually like very much in the background of this whole police station scene, because what we get more of is Niles shows up
Niles
to bring, Niles and Cece show up. They finally catch up with Fran and Mr. Sheffield. And at one point, Mr. Sheffield's like, Niles, like, how did you get through the gay pride parade so fast? And he goes, I borrowed a poodle and like walked, insinuating that he could just sort of like breeze through the crowd if he had a poodle with him. And then we had this scene where I was just as taken in as Mr. Sheffield was in this moment, because this sex worker comes up to Cece and is like, hey, Cece, right? And Cece's like, excuse me, you must have me mistaken for someone else. And she's like, no, Cece Babcock. Like, God, I haven't seen you on the corner for like in a while. But and like gets into this whole conversation like where you're like, wait, I literally wrote, is Cece a prostitute? And then instantly, you know, within like a minute or two, that sex worker walks over to Niles and he pays her like $20. So it's clearly just a setup for Niles to humiliate Cece in front of Mr. Sheffield. But I was very taken in by it.
It was a great bit, solid bit. That was maybe one of my favorite it's like setups and payoffs in the episode. There were some good one-liners, but that whole bit was
yes. Good. And then, so I don't know how you felt about this scene, but I loved this next scene where the way that this all gets resolved. And I will admit, this is a very sitcom-y, like conveniently wrap it up in a ridiculous way plot device that's about to happen. But I found it so funny that I didn't care. Where basically the Russian woman comes in to identify Fran, and she, points at Fran and implies that yes, that's the woman, and they start leading Fran away in handcuffs. And then Fran and the woman is yelling in Russian, and Fran's yelling, and she's like, Fran's like, oh, this is just like what happens to Nicole on Young and the Restless. And the Russian woman literally stops, and she goes, Young and the Restless? And Fran's like, yes, Nicole, when she was accused of stealing the baby. And then the woman starts going, yes, and like suddenly understands exactly what happened, because they clearly are both huge Young and the Restless fans. And then they start sort of recapping this whole plot in Young and the Restless, at which point the police sergeant like jumps in, and you think he's going to yell at them for both being disruptive, but instead he's like, it wasn't Cricket's baby, it was Anthony's. And they're both like, yes, Anthony. And like the whole thing gets resolved, and Fran and this Russian woman end up having nothing but goodwill towards each other, because all is forgiven, and they understand it was this huge misunderstanding.
Yeah, they're all Young and the Restless fans.
Yes. I thought it was like probably a really fun role for that woman who played the Russian mother.
Isn't it kind of interesting how like soap operas are still on, like they still exist, but like there was like a real cultural like obsession with them. I feel like in the 90s, like my mom watched like The Young and the Restless, she watched Brave and the Bold, and like she was like super into them. And like I can remember that Young and the Restless music play every time I was homesick. I had to listen to that Young and the Restless theme song, and then it feels like they're still on, but like I don't. Like even my mom stopped watching them after a certain point, and like I wonder if there's still like as prevalent an audience, or if it's like a dying thing now.
Oh, you know what I was going to say? I think reality television probably ate into a lot of those networks that really provided us with soap operas. I think it probably became cheaper to just do like gross, trashy reality TV as opposed to investing in sets and writers and all of that stuff. But
so how does the episode wrap up?
And then this last scene I thought was fantastic, and it also felt very grounded. So Mr. Sheffield and Fran come back from the police station after this very long ordeal and this very long day, and Gracie is sitting in the kitchen having like a bedtime snack. And Fran says, Fran or Mr. Sheffield says something like, oh, as crazy as it was, I'm actually going to miss that little guy. Like it was kind of nice having a baby around the house. And Gracie, like very innocently and very like childlike way goes, well, then why don't you two just have a baby? And there's like this awkward pause, and Mr. Sheffield's like, we'd have to be married first. And Gracie's like, well, why don't you get married then? And then there's another awkward pause, and Fran's like, well, because you have to be in love to get married. And then again, in this very childlike way, it felt so real. She's like, but you two love each other, right? And, because she's like not understanding the difference between love and romantic love. And to her, like they already feel like a family. And, Mr. Sheffield's like, well, sure. I love Miss Fran in a friend employee type way. And Fran's like, and I love, Mr. Sheffield in a sort of cold British way, like they're kind of like skirting around it, very bumbling through their answers. And she's just like, oh, okay. But like you could get married and have a baby if you wanted to. And then they get even deeper into this, because Fran's like, well, sure, but it's more complicated than that, because we'd have to know that we could live together and work together as partners. And like as she says that, they are literally cleaning up the kitchen together as a team. And they ultimately send her off to bed and kind of just have this like, kids, am I right? Like what a crazy thing to say. But I just thought it was this fantastic little moment that it just is building on those beats that we've seen before. Yeah. Where, it's right under their nose. They work really well together. And I thought it was a very fun way to show that.
It was definitely cute, and it helped, just like the last episode, it's like 2 episodes ago. It just further sort of like solidifies like where the show is going. And I think, It's funny. I always remembered this show as having more of like a will they, won't they thing, but like this show doesn't really, they will. It's a more matter of like, when will they, as opposed to will they, won't they? Because it doesn't seem like there's like much competition. It doesn't seem like, it's not like a back and forth. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just a matter of time before this happens.
Yes. But, as Fran Drescher pointed out, I think when we were talking about, we discussed an interview 1 or 2 episodes ago, she knew that you still couldn't actualize that because people are tuning in for it's just out of your reach. Again, the Jim and Pam of it all. And once they do, it loses something. But this was, this was a great, I really liked that end.
Me too. And then we got a basic parody stinger at the end. Basic Instinct parody.
We did? What happened? So
the episode ends with Fran in a interrogation room dressed in the exact same white miniskirt costume as Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct. She's got her legs crossed. She's smoking a cigarette. They ask her a question. She makes some joke. Then she uncrosses her legs and recrosses them. And then she's like, what? Oh, no, you're not going to see up there. And she makes like some joke like that. And then it ends.
Oh, that is so funny. I completely missed it. I must have pressed pause before the button. It must have been a post-credit thing instead of a normal button. Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Wow. Another iconic, maybe our younger viewers won't even know about that very, very famous scene from Basic Instinct with Sharon Stone, where she is in a police interrogation room. By the way, it's a very like psychological thriller with Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas, and she uncrosses her legs, and we see her vagina in that scene. I think we had a pretty good view of it, right? Or is it just a flash?
No, we saw like it's a flash, but you saw up her. She was not wearing panties. Yes. We saw up her dress. It was like a whole thing.
Which is also like that would be shocking in a movie today.
She said years later that they lied to her and they told her that you wouldn't see up the dress and that they just needed her to remove them because it was her white panties were causing a weird reflection, and they just straight up lied to her. Yeah, you should read up on it. It's fascinating interviews now where she's just like, they were assholes and they lied to me.
Oh my god, that's shocking. But yeah, so but check it out. It's that aside, it's a very tense, disturbing movie. Should we move on to segments?
And now segments.
So. Segments.
Yeah, no, I think we should move on to segments.
We can move on to our segments.
And now, segments.
Segments with Shawn and Toria. We went over a lot of what I liked because mine were not necessarily best lines, but they were best moments. And I loved the diaper changing scene. I loved the scene at the end when Gracie's asking about why they don't have the baby, and I did really enjoy Niles paying a sex worker to pretend she knows Cece from the streets.
I mean, I had a lot of really funny lines. There was Brighton had a line where he goes, Fran has the baby and she's like, oh, what a cute little baby. Da, 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 da. And then Brighton goes, excuse me, Yentl, where's the mother? Which I thought was a really funny line. There was also a line, I think it was Niles, but it may have been Cece, where Fran has this baby, and one of them goes, what was it, a yard sale at Mia Farrow's, which I thought was also a really funny line. Let's see, what else did I like?
Also, when Cece's like... Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
She's like... Oh, who would leave this defenseless little creature? Like what kind of monster would abandon a defenseless little creature? And then Niles is like, by the way, a yellow cab called. You left your dog in the taxi again. And then she goes, that's where I left my Gucci umbrella.
He also says they're trying to find all the things they need around the house for the baby. And Fran says, Niles, do we have any old nipples around the house? And exactly at that moment, the front door opens and Cece walks in and Niles bites his knuckle. He goes like, which is so good.
Yeah.
And then right when Fran is about to get arrested for kidnapping this baby that she didn't really kidnap, she goes, no, can't we just call Al Callings and drive around for a few hours first? Which was a solid O.J. Simpson reference.
Okay.
Which, following that Menendez brothers reference in the last eepisode, is like really like just driving my 90s nostalgia as we watch these shows. There was also the line Mr. Sheffield says, Niles says, "What's the difference between a butler and a houseboy anyway?" And Mr. Sheffield goes, "About 30 years." And Niles goes, "Rotten hell, sir."
Yes. Yes. Oh, that made me laugh really hard too. There was like a bunch of funny stuff, even though I felt like it was like a little wonky getting there, but this was a very enjoyable episode. And we got a Yiddish word this week. We did get a Yiddish word. We actually got, I have 2 Yiddish words. Maybe yours are different, but so there's Shayna Punim,
yes,
which means pretty face. When she's holding the baby, when Fran's holding the baby, she's going, "Shayna Punim, what a little Shayna Punim," which is what a little pretty face. It's a very Jewish thing. And she's also calling him Bubala, which is a term of endearment for a young boy.
Yep.
So those were what I flagged,
that was it. Shayna Punim is the one.
Mm-hmm. And for Nanny trivia, interesting thing behind this. So there is a line in this episode where Fran says she has named this baby and she's named him Joshua Elliott. Yeah. And she goes, Joshua Elliott. And then Mr. Sheffield's like, "You named him?" And she's like, "Well, yeah, Elliott, after your father." And this made me remember that one of our listeners and a subscriber, and it's such an amazing fan of ours, Melissa, messaged us a while back on Instagram, and she let us know that Charles Shaughnessy's real life father, Alfred Shaughnessy, was a writer on the iconic and extremely famous British television show Upstairs Downstairs. It ran in the 70s. It was like the OG Downton Abbey, but like at a time when there was way less things actually on the air. So like all across the world, millions of people would turn in every week to watch. And so I kind of did this little exercise in Alfred Shaughnessy, and he wasn't just a writer on Downton Abbey. He wasn't just a writer on Upstairs Downstairs. He was one of the people who was integral in its creative development. He was the head writer and he was the script editor for 66 episodes.
Damn. So he was like the dude.
He was like, yes,
so
one
cool.
of the dudes. And he apparently did like incredible and meticulous historical research for every episode. And he was known to say, "Television is electronic theater, not second-rate film," which is really like ahead of its time. Now we are in like the golden age of television where, we understand that television is not just like, for people that couldn't make it in film. Like but that was his perspective decades and decades ago. And then the other thing that's very interesting about Charles Shaughnessy's father is he's like a bit, like he's not just upper class, like they were upper class English aristocracy.
So is Charles Shaughnessy basically like raised exactly like Mr. Sheffield? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, so here's a little juicy tidbit. It's rumored that Alfred Shaughnessy was Queen Elizabeth's very first boyfriend.
Whoa.
Like it's rumored, but basically his stepfather was master of the household to King George, Queen Elizabeth's father. And so sometimes he as a boy would stay at Windsor Castle where there was the princesses. So it's almost like maybe, and the thing is, to master of the household for these British estates, like you were also usually like very upper class yourself. You weren't necessarily just like the help. So yeah, Charles Shaughnessy is a man with some serious British pedigree.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
It's
and
so
again,
funny. He's one of those people where people will be like, "Oh, that guy never worked again." And it's like, did that guy even have to ever work at all? Or was he just like fucking with us?
But again, thank you to Melissa for like leading me down that rabbit hole. It ended up being so interesting. And for the Fran or the Cece, I said we're both Frans, because I think if you handed either one of us a baby that seemed helpless, we would run with it and like be like, "I guess it's mine now."
Yeah, I agree. We would. If Elizabeth and I found a baby tomorrow, there was no clear, like, if it was like just an abandoned baby, it would be very hard for us to not be like, well, this is our baby now. Like, we're gonna raise it. Like,
and get like way too attached to it.
Oh
and
my
then,
God,
like,
immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, like within 5 minutes be like, well, like, and this is my life now.
Well, you're gonna have to start a college fund.
Yeah. But so I think we both would do that. We all three would. So
yeah.
So I think that's the episode.
That was the episode. If you liked what you heard and you want to do more, leave a comment or subscribe or leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you do the thing. Share the episode with friends. You can follow us on social media. Where, Toria?
At Mr. Chef Pod. And that's 2 Fs.
Yep. Mr. Chef Pod. That's on Instagram. That's on Twitter. You can search us on Facebook. We're there somewhere. And then what else can you do? If you want to leave us a message, a voice message, you can go to anchor.fm/thenannypod. There's also a support button there if you want to be a subscriber, like some of our subscribers, super fans. And yeah, if you want to find me online, you can do that at Shawn Wrights on Twitter. Toria, where can people find you personally?
Toria Sheffy, 2 Fs and a Y at Instagram.
And what's your home address in case people want to come by and like drop stuff off for you, like gifts?
I actually unhoused right now, and thanks for bringing
that down by the river.
Actually, not funny. LA is having a huge crisis.
We're having a crisis.
It's very sad. It's very sad.
I'm sorry.
It was never funny, but it's somehow less funny.
It's less funny now. I take that all back. And on that note, have a good week, and we will see you next week with more Mr. Sheffield. Bye.
Goodbye.
The Flashing Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.